Let's move right along to our second great speaker, who is Professor David Eldridge, who's a professor at UNSW, and he'll be unpacking the myths surrounding the INS code, which is responsible for a really large proportion of land clearing in New South Wales. David is no stranger to New South Wales's arid and semi-arid environments. In fact, he's spent over 30 years working in New South Wales's inland ecosystems. His research is focused on understanding how human-induced land use impacts the ecology and vegetation in these arid and semi-arid environments. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Brad. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm coming from Gadigal and Bidjigal country at the moment, and I'd like to tell you about, there we go, invasive native scrub, more properly known as encroachment or thickening. The term invasive native scrub is interesting because the word invasive conjures up warlike, aggressive, threatening plants, and scrub to me conjures up brambles and wasteland. So it's no accident that the architects of the INS code wanted us to think that this community that you can see here is nothing more than nasty, threatening wasteland. On the contrary, and we'll be looking at some of the advantages and the positive things about this community. But there's no doubt that the phenomenon that underpins this INS legislation is that woody plants are increasing. They're increasing globally, and there are many reasons for that. But the main reason is that they're either recovering from a history of substantial degradation, generally caused by European livestock, and they're increasing due to greater amounts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. More CO2 in the atmosphere gives these plants a competitive advantage physiologically over grasses and herbaceous material. So if we look at the top left-hand corner, woody plant encroachment in the southwestern US in a anti-clockwise direction, Spain, woody plant communities in central west New South Wales dominated by calitris pine, and of course those two beautiful camels that are grazing some lovely woodland species in Africa. So this encroachment phenomenon happens very quickly. And so this is some photographs from one of the old Soil Conservation Service monitoring sites in Western New South Wales. And we can see that in 1990, this particular property, this paddock, was essentially a grassland with a few shrubs. Within 12 years, it's a shrubland with no grasses. And this is a major issue for pastoralists. It's a major issue managing these systems when you are relying on herbaceous material for pastoral production to feed your sheep and cattle. So let's have a look at some of the myths. And there are a lot of myths associated with woody plant encroachment, or INS. And one of the myths that these are biological deserts. These plants are critically important habitat for a whole range of shrub-dependent birds, such as that beautiful painted honeyeater with the yellow wing in the top center, and on the right-hand side, a honeyeater, the spiny-cheeked honeyeater, that rely on shrublands and woodlands. But these systems also support a whole raft of arthropods, small invertebrates that are important for pollinating plants, including crop plants, but also as prey items for other birds and reptiles. But there'll always be winners and losers. And as shrublands increase, grasslands decline, and birds such as the brown songlark, and tell me in the chat if I've got that name wrong, that brown bird in the top center, it relies on grasslands and open areas, and so will be disadvantaged by shrublands. The second myth is that encroachment reduces plant diversity, and this is completely untrue. We've done lots of work showing that there are a whole raft of plant species that are only found exclusively under shrubs, or some of them have greater abundance under shrubs. And you can see that photo of a shrub there with a beautiful collection of plants beneath it. Even Species such as mosses, lichens, algae, cyanobacteria that are critically important in these systems for stabilizing the soil, they even have close links to shrubs. So there are a bunch of plants that rely on shrubs and do better in shrublands. Myth number 3, encroachment degrades soils. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. We know that shrubs support high levels of carbon. Everyone's talking about carbon, high levels of nitrogen, and lots of other minerals and nutrients as well. And we know that shrublands also have quite stable soils, with some caveats, of course. So encroachment does not degrade soils. The fourth myth is that encroachment reduces water flow through the soil. Now, why would this be important? Well, it's important because in these dryland ecosystems, we need to get as much water into the soil as possible. Shrubs and other woody plants facilitate water movement through the soil. And it doesn't matter whether your system has low grazing, moderate grazing, or high grazing, there's always greater water flow through the soil beneath woody plants. So this brings me to this image here. Why is this system so degraded? Because when people talk about INS, they always bring up pictures like this that show an almost lunar landscape, unlike the one that I showed you at the beginning of my presentation. If I ask a group of pastoralists why this system is like it is, half of them will say, well, those shrubs, they're bad. They take up all the moisture. They're using up all the nutrients. They're creating wind erosion. We need to get rid of those shrubs. The other half of the pastoralists will say to me, this tells me a story that this system has been extensively overgrazed, usually by European livestock. I was interested in trying to unpack whether it's grazing or whether it's shrubs that's responsible for this typical INS scenario. And if we look at just 3 measures of function here on the left-hand side, nutrient cycling, the ability to cycle carbon and nitrogen and other nutrients, the ability to infiltrate water into the soil and to maintain its soil stability, then we can see that the general effects of shrubs is to increase functions. But the general effect of grazing is to reduce functions or to have no effect, a benign effect. So the message from this research is that grazing reduces or dampens the positive effect of shrubs on ecosystem functions. And we have a lot of work to show this. So finally, how do we move forward? These are my personal views, and many will agree and some will disagree. But in my view, clearing is incompatible with nature positive, and the INS legislation is included in this clearing. The invasiveness tests lack science and credibility. There is no rigorous science behind the notion that these plants are invasive. The second thing is that pastoralists, well, landholders, farmers are allowed to clear large areas of INS, up to 1,000 hectares, which in my view is excessive. We need to think about maximum areas of clearance that should be allowable. Absolutely no clearing in endangered EECs, and we heard Michelle say that despite the fact that that clearing is not supposed to happen in EECs, it still happens. I can accept that under some situations we need to manage these shrubs, no doubt about that. But we need more nuanced approaches. Instead of broad scale use of bulldozers, we need to think about more selective, kinder ways of managing these systems. And finally, we need more monitoring. We need more monitoring, the sort of stuff that Michelle's been talking about, clearing rates, but we also need more training, and not just for agency staff, but for the general public, so that we can understand the true value of these important communities. Thank you.